Okay, so simple and compound interest. So you've heard of interest before. If you borrow money, then they're going to charge you interest for borrowing money, right? Or, right, if you buy a house, then you get a loan on the house, then they're going to charge you interest. You're going to have to pay an amount to be able, when you pay the money back, right? Because nobody's just going to give you that money for free. But there are two different ways that the interest can be charged. Simple or compound interest. Now, if you think of simple, if something is simple, that means what? Easy, right? Okay? And that's what simple interest means. Simple interest means interest that's charged once. So in other words, if you borrow money, they're just going to charge you interest one time, and then you pay back the principal amount, which is the amount you borrow, plus whatever interest there is. Okay? Just one time, charged once. Okay? So it's only going to be done one time. And to find simple interest, okay, you're just going to take, okay, first of all, let's do a little bit of a definition because I want to use the proper term. The amount you borrow is called the principal. Principal L-E, principal A-L. L-E, I think. Sorry. I was doing it like principal, like the person. Is that right? Oh, well, we'll find out. Close enough. So, you're going to pay interest based on how much you borrow on the principal. Right? So all we need to do to find simple interest is to take the percent times the principal, and that's going to give you the amount of interest. So it's simply a percent of a number, just like we've been doing. Okay? But we then have to put in that amount, or add in that amount, okay? So you'll take the principal plus the interest, and that's going to equal the total amount that you owe. Okay? All right. Now, yes?
Sorry, I must have missed you saying this. The principal's
That's the amount you borrow.
Yeah.
The amount you borrow is the principal. Okay?
Oh, that's what that hurt. I'm sorry.
All right?
Yeah.
Now, that's if you would keep the money for 1 year. Right? So this gives you the amount you would owe for 1 year. But what if I borrowed the money over the course of 5 years? I would pay simple interest how many times?
5 times.
5 times. Okay? So, you must pay interest each year. That you have the money. So, for example, 5 years, 5 interest payments. But they're always the same. So we can just do it as a multiple. So 5 years means multiply the interest amount times 5. If you kept it 10 years, multiply the interest amount times 10. Okay? All right, so let's look at an example. They give us an example in our book. It says calculate the simple interest. I'm just going to do number 1.
Wait, what page is this?
Doesn't matter. You're doing your work. You're doing your notes. It's on page 45, but I'm going to write it all down. Simple interest earned. So in other words, you're putting money in a savings account and earning interest this time. When $1,500 is invested 7% for 5 years. Okay? So what we're going to do is I'm first going to write down the steps. This is the process. First, convert percent to a what? Decimal. Exactly, because we cannot do any math with a percent. So you know that business. Okay? Multiply that times that decimal. I'll stick it in there. That decimal times the principal. Okay? Because we're paying interest based on the principal. Step 3. Multiply that amount by the number of years. And finally, add the principal plus all the interest to get your total. And it doesn't matter if it's total that you're earning or total that you're paying. It makes absolutely no difference. The monetary amount's going to be the same. Yes, ma'am.
Can you just have 2 seconds?
You bet. Yeah, no worries. So I'm going to reread them anyway. So you're going to convert the percent to a decimal because we have to be able to multiply with it. We're going to then multiply that decimal times the principal amount. And remember, the principal is the amount you borrowed, but it can also be the amount you invested. So that's the initial monetary amount, the money they give you. Then you'll multiply that amount times the number of years that you're keeping the money or saving the money. And then simply add the principal plus all the interest to get the total. So all of the years of interest to get the total amounts. Okay? So very straightforward percent problem. The difference is this part. Right? We have to do it. We have to continually add all of the interest over the entire period. So that's what you have to keep in mind. Okay? All right. So let's look at our example here. So simple interest is earned, and remember that they have to tell you what kind of interest. So in this case, it specifically says simple interest, right? So that's just a percent of the number, because compound interest is slightly different. Okay? So simple interest is earned when $1,500 is invested at 7% for 5 years. So first, I need to find out how much interest. So we'll convert the percent to a decimal. So if you had your example going on over here on the side, 7%, it becomes what? 0.07. There you go. Okay? Right? Then we're simply going to multiply that times the principal. So 0.07 times $1,500. Anybody? You know, y'all have the calculators. You're going to do the math, right? 105? Okay? But we're going to keep that money in that account for 5 years. So it's not just 105 once, it's 105 how many times? 5. So 5 times 105. Oh, I forgot y'all don't like the dot. I don't like the X, but oh well. 5 times 105 is 525. So over the course of the loan, you're going to earn $525 in interest, right? But you still have the original amount of money you put in too, right? So we need to add the principal and all that interest. So $1,500 plus $525 means that at the end of the 5 years, we will have what? And make sure you put your units. So it's got to be dollars, right? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So 1562.50 is some percent of $25,000. So what we're doing now is we're looking for the percent. Okay. Well, of means that we would normally be taking the number of percent and multiplying it times the amount, right? Okay. So we need to do the opposite of that. Well, what is the opposite of multiply? Okay. So what we have here so I can't do this as an equation, can I? So we're just going to divide away this 25,000. Okay. So instead of multiply to get this, we're just going to divide it. Can somebody divide that for me, please? 0. What now?
0.0625.
Okay. Which gives us a nice decimal. And what am I going to then do with that decimal? Change it into a percent. So if you have the percent and usually multiply times the principal, then what you're going to do if you're looking for the percent is simply do the opposite and divide the interest, right? Because it's usually percent times the principal, or principal times the percent, doesn't matter, equals the interest. So just do the opposite and instead of multiply, divide. So 6.25%.
So the symbol
Makes sense.
is going to be seen to a decimal many times of it, like
By the principal.
interest is the divide into net is
Exactly. So you're just doing exactly the opposite. Okay? Now, for those of you who have had equations, so many of you have had some algebra in your past, right? So you've had an equation. This is the same thing as you could make an equation out of this by saying is always equal. Do you remember the word is always becomes the what? Equal symbol?
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Some percent. So X percent, I don't know, right? Of means times 25,000. And then your whole job is to get the X by itself, right? And how is this connected to it? Multiplication. The opposite of multiply is divide.
Well, I didn't get this.
If you it's just an aside. It's the same thing. If you're used to doing algebraic methods, I'm assuming you had some algebra, right? No?
Yeah, we have.
Okay. Then you could write it as an equation as well. Okay. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
62.
So
Is some percent of 25.
right.
Mr. South, can you please write these steps for that structure from that one that you just wrote, like the one?
The 6.25, can you just write the steps for that? Or is it
Well,
the same?
it's the same steps that we used here, but instead of multiply that decimal, because we don't have the decimal, right? We need to find it. So in order to find something that you don't know, you simply do the opposite. So instead of multiplying the decimal times the principal, we're going to take the answer we would get and divide it by the principal. So the amount of interest divided by the principal. So it's simply, so let me write those steps down. So what I did on this particular problem, okay? Simply, first, divide, okay, the interest by the principal to get the decimal.
Divide the
Interest.
interest
Okay?
by
Principal is the loan.
Right. The principal is the amount of the loan. Good. Then convert to a percent. Now, that's the process But guys, I don't want you to think of it as being a new process. It's not. It's you're doing the same thing, except you have a different piece of information than you had before, right? So that means we have to do it the same process, but backwards.
It's like the decrease and increase into 60. Wait, was it that one where it was like plus 100 or minus 100? Or is that
Not really, because that's only for increase and decrease. So you're really, but you're thinking about that. Yeah, it's the same idea that in order to do one, if you do one, the way you do the other is go backwards, right? Do's the opposite operation.
Wait, so
Okay.
this is for the rate of interest, these two steps.
Yes, if you're looking for the rate of interest.
So do we still apply 3 and 4? The multiply that?
No, because it says per year, 1 year. So we're only dealing with 1 year.
But if it's more?
Yeah, if it was one, it wouldn't be in one of these. It wouldn't be in these problems. It'd be too difficult for you. Yeah, it'd be too much.
So,
Okay.
what's this called again? Rate of interest.
Right, you're looking for the rate of interest. But it's still simple interest. Okay? All right. Let me pause that for okay. So if you think of compound versus simple, compound sounds more complicated, doesn't it? Okay? So that means you get more interest over the time. Okay? And we're not going to worry about compounding periods and that kind of thing. This is a very simple one. There's a simple formula for it, but apparently they don't want you to use that. So what we're going to do to be able to use compound interest means that you're going to pay or earn, because remember, if you invest money, you earn money. But if you borrow money, then you're going to pay money. Pay or earn interest on previous interest. It's more complicated, more compounded, right? Guys? Okay? So, whereas simple interest is just based on the principal, right? Simply based on the principal. Yeah? Compound interest is based on the principal and the interest. So you're paying interest on top of interest. Okay? It's based on simple interest, it's just based on the principal. But for compound interest, you're going to pay or earn interest on top of the interest that you've already earned or paid. Okay? So, the way you find it is very similar. Okay? But what's going to happen is that you're going to have to do a calculation using multiplication instead of addition like we did before. We were just adding them before. This one time you're just going to use multiplication. So, let's say we have, let's just look at an example and then we'll put some together steps for it. $7,500 is invested. This is just number one on the next page. Is invested at 6% compound interest. So this time we're not talking about simple interest, but compound interest. Calculate the value after 2 years. Okay? So this time we have 2 years worth of interest that we need to find. Are we good? So let's talk about some steps. First of all, I can't calculate the interest unless I know how much interest I'm having to pay, right? So that is very similar, except we're going to be looking at adding interest to our principal as we go. So that sounds a lot like a percent of increase, right? So what we're going to do is simply take 100% plus the interest percent to get our multiplier.
Plus the what percentage?
Whatever your interest percent is, right? Yeah. Again, because we're paying interest on top of interest, we're putting that extra amount in. So it's going to be, this one is more like the increase that we've been doing. Okay? So that gives you your multiplier. Then all you need to do is use your calculator to do the steps. Do the principal times the thing from step 1. So like if it was 1.0, put decimal from step 1, because you know that you can't do it without it being a decimal. Decimal from step 1. Okay? And you need that decimal from step 1. You're simply going to multiply over and over for the number of years.
Oh, so it would be like the principal times.
So principal times 1, so in this case, it's 6% interest, right? So that's 100 plus 6%, 100% plus 6%, which is 106%, which is what decimal? 1.06, right? So that's our multiplier, just like an increase, right? Because compound interest, we are increasing. What was our principal? 7,500, yeah? And how many years are we going to keep that money? So that means we're going to multiply times that increase how many times? 2 times. So it's the same as an increase, but you're going to be increasing more than 1 time. So we're going to take principal times the interest again. Right? So what if it was 4 years? Yeah, times that decimal 4 times. Okay? Now, if you want to use parentheses and then an exponent or an index on your calculator, you can, or you can simply just click in times over and over and over again. So in this case, our principal was $7,500, right? Times, what is our decimal? 1.06. But it's for 2 years, so I need to do the 1.06 how many times? Twice. Okay? So will somebody click that into your calculator and give me a number? 8,000, I'm sorry, what? 427. And of course, it's dollars. Okay? So that's how much money that you would have if you had invested that $7,500 for the 2 years at 6%. Compound interest. So it's slightly different than simple interest. Okay? Yes?
Can you lose interest?
On an investment, yes, but usually these are fixed interest things. Yeah. Yes. And you can have interest compounded at different rates too, but here they're just compounding it annually. But some loans or some savings accounts will say compounded daily, monthly, compounded continuously, which means that it just constantly compounds the interest one after another. It turns out that it makes a difference of simply pennies. So it really doesn't matter. But yeah, the more compounding periods you can get, the better. if you're earning interest. If you're paying interest, the fewer compounding periods, the better. Okay? Because every time you see the multiplier, every time you have a compounding period, so 2 years, you have to multiply it again. Okay? Y'all want to try one? So do all of those simple interest problems, the compound interest problems, and the mini task
Is that for homework?
for homework. Yes. Okay?